What if the greatest empire the world has ever seen, the true Atlantis, was not sunk beneath the ocean, but buried under our feet? What if maps, monuments, and manuscripts all pointed to a civilization so advanced, so unified, so dangerous to the powers that followed, that it had to be erased from history? The name is whispered like a ghost: Tartaria. A word once printed across vast swaths of maps, stretching from Europe across Siberia into the heart of Asia. A land so massive that it dwarfed the empires we celebrate in textbooks. But today, the name has vanished. Not from geography alone, but from memory, from classrooms, from the very story of human civilization. And that absence should terrify you, because history doesn't just forget empires. Empires are erased, vanishing from the record. Flip open an atlas from the 1600s, 1700s, even early 1800s. You'll see Tartaria clearly labeled: a sovereign power, a vast network of cities, rivers, and trade. Yet by the mid-19th century, the name disappears. Not shrinks, not declines. Disappears. Think about that. Rome collapsed, but Rome is remembered. Egypt fell, yet its pyramids still stand. But Tartaria, scrubbed from record with surgical precision. The maps remain, but academia tells you they were mistakes. An empire covering continents, dismissed as a cartographic error. Does that sound like an accident, or does it sound like a cover-up? The Great Mud Flood. Then there is the evidence hiding in plain sight: architecture buried beneath layers of earth, cities where lower floors of buildings lie underground, windows sunk beneath modern streets. Across Europe, Russia, Asia, and even the Americas, countless structures bear the same scars. Mainstream history explains it away: foundation changes, shifting soil, design quirks. But what if it wasn't local? What if it was global? The Great Mud Flood theory proposes just that. A cataclysm swept the world in the 18th or 19th century, drowning entire cities in silt and mud, erasing Tartaria in one unimaginable disaster. Survivors rebuilt on top, leaving clues only for those who knew where to look. An empire wasn't merely conquered, it was buried alive, hidden architecture. And yet, even buried, Tartaria speaks. Look at the so-called old world buildings in cities across the globe. Massive stone structures, arches of impossible scale, intricate domes, spires, and towers that defy the tools and timelines credited to their construction. We are told peasants with horse-drawn carts built cathedrals that even modern engineers can barely replicate. We are told palaces, train stations, and sprawling civic complexes appeared almost overnight in the 1800s, with no detailed record of who built them or how. These are not coincidences. These are relics of Tartarian design, hints of a global civilization whose architecture channeled energy, resonated with frequency, and served functions we can only guess at. Lost technologies, for this is the true heart of the cover-up. Technology. Tartaria's architecture may not have been merely aesthetic. The towering spires, the domes, the star fortresses aligned to magnetic ley lines, these were not decorative, they were machines. Evidence suggests they harnessed free energy from the atmosphere, drawing power directly from the ether. Towers transmitting wireless electricity long before Tesla. Buildings designed not only to shelter, but to generate, amplify, and resonate with forces modern science has yet to fully acknowledge. Imagine a world where power flowed freely, where industry did not poison, where empires could not control fuel or resources because energy was infinite. Imagine a civilization unified not by conquest, but by access to limitless power. That was Tartaria, and that is why it had to be destroyed. The global reset. To erase Tartaria, the builders of the new world needed more than mud. They needed a reset. The 19th century is filled with strange events. Orphan trains delivering thousands of children across continents, entire populations resettled. world fairs showcasing massive, temporary buildings supposedly constructed in mere months, then demolished immediately after. What if these were not temporary at all? What if they were rebranded remnants of Tartaria, exhibited, then destroyed to prevent recognition? The so-called Industrial Revolution may not have been a triumph of innovation, but the resetting of history, the rewriting of civilization after Tartaria's erasure. Atlantis reborn, Atlantis destroyed. Legends of Atlantis have haunted humanity for millennia. A great civilization, rich in knowledge, destroyed in a cataclysm, wiped from record. What if we have been searching in the wrong place? What if Atlantis was not beneath the sea, but beneath our cities? Tartaria may not have been Atlantis's twin. It may have been Atlantis itself, reborn, thriving, and once again destroyed by forces unwilling to let humanity live freely. The rewrite of history. And so, elites rewrote the story. Maps relabeled, textbooks cleansed, architecture reattributed, myths dismissed. The past 2 centuries of academia have worked tirelessly to convince us Tartaria never existed. But the evidence is there, in the ground, in the stone, in the silence of history itself. The greatest cover-up of all time is not a hidden treasure or a secret society. It is the deliberate erasure of an entire global civilization. A civilization that may have held the key to free energy, harmonious design, and the truth of humanity's potential. And that is the secret the world was never meant to remember. If Tartaria was erased, then the mud was the weapon. Not just in one city, not in one country, but across the globe. The Great Mud Flood was the cataclysm that buried a civilization alive. And its fingerprints are everywhere, if you dare to look. The buried evidence. Walk through old quarters of European cities, and you'll find doors that open into soil, windows half submerged below street level, entire floors underground, bricked up, forgotten. In St. Petersburg, in Paris, in Prague, in New York, in Melbourne, the same story repeats. Buildings that appear sunken, as though the earth swallowed them. Mainstream explanations blame design quirks or centuries of street raising, but do you raise every street, in every city, across continents all at once? Or do you admit the possibility of a global flood, one not of water, but of earth itself, the wave of earth? Imagine it, a tide not of water, but of mud and silt, rushing across landscapes, smothering streets, swallowing plazas, climbing walls until only rooftops remained, cities silenced in hours, survivors climbing out of upper windows, building again upon the layer of death. The mud flood was not a localized disaster. It was global. Its traces are universal. From Asia to Europe, from the Americas to Australia, structures built before the 19th century display the same eerie scars: a buried ground floor, a city half-eaten by earth, the survivors' silence. And yet, no grand records describe it, no histories detail a worldwide burial. Instead, silence. Fragmentary reports of flooding in certain years, occasional notes of earthworks, but nothing of the magnitude suggested by the evidence. Why? Because history was rewritten. Survivors may have lived through the mud flood, but their accounts were erased, their memories reshaped into a narrative of normalcy. Whole generations were cut away, orphan trains redistributing children into new families, new stories, new origins. Those who could testify were silenced. Those too young to remember were remade. Star forts under mud. Consider the star forts, geometric fortifications spread worldwide from Europe to India to the Americas. They were not military installations in the modern sense, but advanced energy centers, channeling forces we no longer understand. And yet, many are found partially buried, their lower bastions lost beneath earth, their perfect symmetry broken by mud. If they were Tartarian power stations, then the mud flood did more than bury cities. It crippled the energy grid of a civilization. The flood wasn't random. It was strategic. The global pattern. Look at the timeline. The early to mid-1800s. Cities suddenly rebuilt. Architecture reattributed. Massive construction projects claimed to have been completed in impossibly short spans. At the same time, evidence of burial everywhere. The mud flood is not only geological, it is historical. It marks the moment when Tartaria ended and the reset began. A manufactured disaster? But what caused it? Was it natural cataclysm or engineered reset? Some point to comets, earthquakes, liquefaction. Others suggest technology itself, weaponized energy released to collapse the very ground. Perhaps the builders of the New World harnessed forces similar to Tartaria's own, turning them into weapons. The result was the same. Cities drowned in mud, populations erased, and a blank slate upon which a new history could be written. The mud as a shroud. The mud flood was not only destruction, it was concealment. By burying Tartaria, the resetters buried its technologies, its knowledge, its living proof. Beneath the soil, the old world sleeps, waiting to be uncovered. Every sunken window, every half-buried arch, every bricked-up doorway is a whisper from Tartaria. We were here, we thrived, and we were buried. The Great Mud Flood is not a theory. It is the scar left by the erasure of civilization, and until we recognize it, we cannot understand the scale of the cover-up. If Tartaria's cities were buried by mud, then what remained above ground became a problem for the new order. Too many colossal buildings, too much beauty, too much evidence of a world that did not fit the narrative of peasants, horse carts, and crude tools. The solution? Rebrand the ruins, showcase them as new marvels, and when the crowds were gone, demolish them. The world fairs, exhibiting the old world. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, great world fairs sprang up across the globe. Chicago, 1893, Paris, 1900, St. Louis, 1904, San Francisco, 1906, 1915, and more. These events claimed to celebrate industrial progress, but look closely at the photographs. The scale of the buildings, the domes, the spires, the massive stonework, it all looks eerily like Tartarian design, and the story they tell doesn't hold. Officials claimed these sprawling complexes were built in a matter of months. Palaces, fountains, colonnades, all supposedly temporary plaster and wood facades, created only for an exhibition, and then destroyed. But does that make sense? Would governments spend fortunes constructing entire cities of stone and marble only to tear them down immediately? Or were these fairs staged showcases of existing Tartarian structures, rebranded as modern creations, given false origins, and then demolished to hide the truth? The lie of temporary construction. The narrative of temporary architecture has become a cornerstone of historical cover. Chicago's White City, with its dazzling palaces and domes, was said to be plaster, yet eyewitnesses describe solidity, stone, permanence. In some cases, the supposed temporary buildings lasted decades after the fairs, housing universities and civic institutions. How could flimsy plaster endure decades of use? Because it wasn't plaster. It was Tartarian stonework, repurposed and renamed. The demolition, then, wasn't recycling. It was evidence removal. The architecture that shouldn't exist. Consider the sudden boom of ornate public buildings in the 1800s. Courthouses, train stations, cathedrals, civic halls, seemingly sprouting in towns that otherwise had little industry or wealth. Why did small cities suddenly produce colossal, intricately carved structures rivaling the cathedrals of Europe? The official explanation is ambition, borrowed styles, hard labor. But in truth, these were inheritances. Tartarian buildings left behind, absorbed into new narratives. The people didn't build them. They inherited them. That is why their origins are vague, their architects obscure, their construction timelines implausible. They were rebranded relics of a forgotten empire. The demolition campaign. The reset didn't just rebrand Tartarian architecture, it erased it. After the fairs, after the exhibits, the buildings were systematically torn down. Chicago's White City, Paris's pavilions, San Francisco's palaces, all destroyed within years. Think about that. If these were truly masterpieces of modern construction, why obliterate them? Why not preserve them as symbols of pride? The answer, because they were never modern. They were Tartarian. Leaving them standing would expose the lie. The demolition was a purge, a global script. This pattern wasn't isolated. Across continents, governments carried out the same script. Claim ownership of monumental structures. Explain them away as recent projects. Showcase them briefly, then demolish or bury them. It happened in Europe. It happened in America. It happened in Asia. The cover-up was global, because the civilization it erased was global. The architecture that remains. Not all Tartarian relics were destroyed. Some were too integrated into cities, too massive to erase. Look at the Kremlin's towers, India's star forts, the domes of Istanbul, the grand stations of Europe. Look at Washington, D.C., its Capitol dome, its obelisks, its monumental symmetry. Do you really believe horse carts, bricklayers, and 19th century tools created all this with ease? Or are we still living among the ruins of Tartaria, blinded by a narrative designed to keep us from seeing? The greatest theft. The architecture of Tartaria wasn't just buildings, it was technology. Energy resonators disguised as spires, domes that amplified frequencies, star forts that channeled Earth's magnetism. These were not decorative, they were functional. By erasing Tartaria, elites stole not just history but infrastructure. They inherited a world powered by free energy, then dismantled it, ensuring humanity would forever depend on their control of coal, oil, and electricity. The architecture of lies is not just about covering the past, it is about chaining the future. The buildings we admire as Victorian marvels, the fairs we celebrate as triumphs of progress, the sudden demolitions dismissed as urban renewal. They are all part of the same story. Tartaria was not lost. It was stolen, piece by piece, brick by brick, until only the lie remained. If Tartaria was erased, burying its cities and demolishing its architecture wasn't enough. The true heart of a civilization is its people, the memory they carry, the stories they tell. To rewrite history, you cannot just destroy buildings. You must also reset populations. And in the 19th century, something strange happened. Hundreds of thousands of children were moved across continents, stripped of their past, and handed new identities. They called it the orphan trains, the flood of children. Between the mid-1800s and early 1900s, trains crisscrossed America carrying orphans by the thousands. Photographs show them lined up in rows, expressionless, waiting to be distributed. The official narrative? Cities were overcrowded, poverty was rampant, and charities relocated children to new homes in the countryside. But the numbers don't add up. Where did so many children come from? Why were there so few records of their origins? And why did this practice coincide perfectly with the supposed collapse of Tartaria and the Great Mud Flood timeline? A population without memory. Children are the perfect blank slate, too young to remember their past, too malleable to resist new stories. Entire populations of orphans could be given new names, new parents, new languages, and within a generation, the past would vanish. If Tartaria's adult population perished in the mud flood, or other engineered disasters, the orphans may have been survivors, redistributed across the new world, to erase any trace of their origins. In America, in Australia, in Europe, everywhere at once, a wave of children without history. The global pattern. The orphan trains were not unique to the United States. Similar programs appeared in Canada, Britain, Russia, and Australia. Always the same explanation: overcrowding, urban poverty, orphans in need of families. Always the same result: masses of children with no clear ties spread into lands needing settlers. It looks less like charity and more like population engineering. If Tartaria was a global civilization, its people had to be scattered, fragmented, and absorbed into new cultures. The orphan trains accomplished exactly that. The new narrative. Once the children were placed, a new story could be written. They were taught new histories, histories that omitted Tartaria. They grew up believing they were simply poor or abandoned, their true heritage erased. Within a single generation, the memory of Tartaria's people was gone. This is why the 19th century feels like a void. Entire cities rebuilt, entire technologies forgotten, entire populations reset. The world we know today is not the natural continuation of history. It is the aftermath of a global reset. Why children? Ask yourself, why children? Why not resettle adults? Who could labor? Who could testify? Because adults remember, adults resist. Children adapt. By scattering them, the architects of the reset ensured no community of Tartarian survivors could rise to tell the truth. No collective memory could challenge the new narrative. The builders of the new order didn't just bury Tartaria's monuments, they buried Tartaria's identity in the minds of its own children. The human cost. Behind the logistics lies tragedy. These were not statistics. They were lives torn apart, families lost, generations scattered, a civilization's people diluted into silence. The orphan trains were not humanitarian. They were historical amnesia in motion. Every whistle of those trains was another page of Tartaria's story erased. The silent evidence. Even today, descendants of orphan train children search for roots they cannot find. Records vanish, origins blur, and questions remain unanswered. The silence itself is evidence. Why are the origins of so many children undocumented? Why did governments and charities destroy records, or never keep them? Why do the orphan trains coincide with the global timeline of Tartaria's erasure? Because the children were not simply orphans, they were the remnants of a civilization that had to be forgotten. The reset complete. The mud flood buried the buildings. The world fairs rebranded the architecture. The demolitions destroyed the evidence. And the orphan trains erased the people. By the dawn of the 20th century, the reset was complete. Tartaria no longer existed. Not in stone, not in story, not in memory. Only traces remained, scattered across maps, buried beneath mud, hidden in half-sunken windows and silent photographs of nameless children. This was not history as accident. This was history rewritten. If Tartaria was truly erased, the question is why. Empires fall, civilizations crumble, but history remembers them. Rome's ruins stand, Egypt's pyramids endure. Yet Tartaria was scrubbed from existence with surgical precision. Why? Because Tartaria held the key to something the New World powers could never allow. Free, limitless energy. The towers that powered the world. Look at photographs and engravings of Tartarian architecture. The spires, domes, obelisks, and towers. We are told they were decorative, aesthetic flourishes of a bygone era. But what if they were more? Consider the designs. Tall, conductive towers capped with copper or gold, domes aligned to resonance, star forts laid out with geometric precision. These weren't ornaments, they were machines. They drew energy from the atmosphere, the ether, and transmitted it wirelessly. This is why Tartarian cities glowed with light, why vast fountains poured water seemingly without effort, why trains and trams of the 19th century ran with little visible means of power. They were tapping into a grid not of coal or oil, but of the earth itself. The threat to empire. Free energy is not just convenience, it is freedom. If energy flows from the sky, no empire can monopolize it. No nation can charge for it. No elite can control it. Think of the world built on oil, coal and gas. Wars fought over pipelines. Fortunes built on scarcity. Now imagine a world where Tartaria's towers powered every home, every workshop, every city without cost. Imagine no need for oil barons, no dependency on industry, no chains of resource extraction. That world existed, and it had to be destroyed. Echoes in Tesla, even after Tartaria's fall, fragments survived. Nikola Tesla, in the late 19th century, rediscovered wireless transmission of energy. His Wardenclyffe Tower was nothing new. It was a reawakening of Tartarian technology. And what happened to Tesla? His funding cut, his tower demolished, his research seized. His name buried for decades until too late. The pattern repeats. Whenever humanity reaches toward free energy, the resetters intervene. Because free energy isn't just science, it is revolution. Star forts and resonance. The star forts, scattered worldwide, are another clue. Officially, they are military defenses. But why the geometric perfection? Why alignments to magnetic fields? Why so many in places where battles never occurred? Because they weren't forts. They were nodes in the grid, resonant structures channeling energy through geometry. They connected cities into networks of power, distribution, and even communication. Buried by the mud flood, stripped of their function, their true purpose was forgotten. But their presence remains, silent witnesses to the power Tartaria once wielded. The reset of technology. When the reset came, the technology was dismantled. Towers removed, spires capped, domes converted. The survivors were told these were merely churches, castles, civic buildings. Their energy function was erased, their beauty reclassified as ornament. Then, step by step, humanity was reintroduced to energy, this time controlled. Steam, coal, oil, electricity, all sold at a price. The same powers that buried Tartaria now built empires on scarcity. They didn't invent energy, they repackaged it. The hidden motive. This is the ultimate reason Tartaria was erased. Not because it failed, not because it collapsed, but because it thrived. It had unlocked the one force that could end empires before they began. Infinite energy. And so, the mud flood buried the cities. The orphan trains erased the people. The world fairs rebranded the ruins. And the fossil fuel era rose in their place, binding humanity to dependence, the cost of forgetting. Today, we pay for light, heat, motion, things Tartaria harnessed freely. We build skyscrapers that imitate their towers but serve no higher purpose. We marvel at domes that once sang with resonance, but now sit silent. The cost of forgetting Tartaria is not only historical, it is economic, social, planetary. The suppression of free energy enslaved humanity to an industrial machine, keeping us centuries behind where we could be. Tartaria wasn't erased because it was weak. It was erased because it was powerful. Its free energy threatened the foundations of the world order we now take for granted. And so, it was buried, not just in mud, but in silence. History is supposed to be a timeline, a chain of cause and effect, one era flowing into the next. But when you examine the 18th and 19th centuries, the chain breaks. Too many blanks, too many contradictions. Entire nations suddenly modernized. Populations appeared from nowhere. Buildings of impossible scale rose, only to be demolished. This isn't a timeline. It's a reset. The fabrication of history. Why do so many of our textbooks begin their modern history in the 1800s? Why does everything before that appear fuzzy, incomplete, scattered? Wars and revolutions are used as excuses, but the deeper pattern is clear. The story was rewritten. The old world, the Tartarian world, was overwritten with a new narrative, created by the victors of the reset. And once the pen is in their hand, they dictate everything: who we believe we are, where we come from, and what is possible. A world suddenly modern. Look at photographs from the mid to late 1800s. Grand train stations, monumental civic halls, electric trams running through city streets long before electricity was supposedly in common use. Where did it all come from? The official answer: progress, ingenuity, industrial revolution. But the leap was too sudden, the technologies too advanced, the architecture too monumental. It looks less like progress and more like inheritance. Humanity didn't build a new world from scratch. It occupied the remnants of one already built. Population shifts. The orphan trains weren't just humanitarian programs. They were part of a global reset of populations. Whole groups were displaced, moved, resettled. Immigration waves filled empty cities, giving them new histories, new origins, new myths. Entire civilizations can vanish if you remove their elders, scatter their children, and rewrite their story. Within a generation, the truth is gone. The wipe of memory. Catastrophes like the mud flood didn't just bury buildings, they buried context. Survivors couldn't explain what had happened, only that the world had changed overnight. Those who controlled printing presses, schools, and institutions stepped in, filling the void with a carefully curated history. Wars provided cover. Fires destroyed archives. Libraries mysteriously burned. Again and again, the slate was wiped clean, and the new narrative stamped in place. The resetter's goal. The reset wasn't random. It was purposeful. Whoever carried it out wanted a world in which energy was scarce, populations were obedient, and history reinforced their control. They didn't just erase Tartaria, they built a new order on top of it. The Industrial Revolution, a rebranding of technologies once freely available. The Age of Exploration, a narrative to disguise global infrastructure already in place. Colonial expansion. The redistribution of Tartaria's cities and resources under new banners. Every era of progress after the reset was less a breakthrough and more a cover story, the echoes of the old world. Still, traces of Tartaria bleed through, maps that show its borders, architecture too advanced for its time, folk stories that speak of a great flood of earth. The evidence wasn't erased completely, it was scattered, hoping no one would connect the dots. But once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. The world as we know it was rebooted, and the operating system we call history was installed on top. The biggest lie. The global reset didn't just erase an empire, it erased possibility. It taught us that scarcity is natural, that progress is linear, that civilization is fragile. But Tartaria proves the opposite. Abundance existed, unity existed, free energy existed. The reset was not about the past, it was about the future, a future stolen from humanity, hidden beneath mud, rewritten in books, demolished brick by brick until only the lie remained. For centuries, seekers of truth have searched for Atlantis, the fabled city of knowledge, abundance, and power, said to have vanished in a single cataclysm. Plato described it as vast, technologically advanced, and ultimately erased by disaster. Scholars debate locations from the Mediterranean to the Americas. But what if the answer has been hiding in plain sight? What if Atlantis wasn't a city beneath the sea, but a civilization buried beneath our feet? What if the real Atlantis was Tartaria, the mirror of legends? Compare the two stories. Atlantis, a vast empire, advanced beyond its neighbors, suddenly destroyed and wiped from record. Tartaria, a vast empire, advanced beyond its neighbors, suddenly destroyed and wiped from record. The parallels are undeniable. Myths across cultures echo the same memory. A golden age of architecture, technology, and unity, followed by catastrophic erasure. Atlantis may not be a lost island. It may be a memory of Tartaria, passed down in fragments, distorted through time. A civilization of scale. Atlantis is often imagined as one city. Tartaria was more than that. It was global. Maps show it sprawling across Asia, stretching into Europe, touching the Americas. Architecture with identical patterns, star forts, domes, towers, appear across continents as if stamped from a unified blueprint. This wasn't regional innovation, it was a single system. Just as Atlantis was said to be a civilization greater than any that followed, Tartaria encompassed the world in ways our textbooks dare not admit. The catastrophic end. Atlantis was drowned by water. Tartaria was drowned by earth, a mud flood instead of a tidal wave, but the result the same: sudden destruction, suffocation, burial, survivors scattered, stories told in whispers, myths born from memory. The Atlantis legend may be the world's subconscious echo of Tartaria's fall. The disaster was too large, too impactful to forget entirely, but too dangerous to allow in the official record. And so, it slipped into myth. The myth of progress. Atlantis is often framed as a warning. Hubris leads to collapse. But what if the truth is different? What if both Atlantis and Tartaria didn't fall naturally, but were deliberately erased? Not punished by gods, but destroyed by men, or by forces that saw their knowledge as a threat? This would explain why the story is repeated in so many cultures, not because of coincidence, but because the same suppression has happened more than once. Civilization rises, unlocks free energy and unity, then is reset, leaving only myth behind. The real golden age. If Tartaria was Atlantis, then humanity has already lived its golden age. Free energy, global architecture, resonant technologies. These weren't dreams, they were reality. Our ancestors walked among marvels we now dismiss as impossible. The tragedy isn't that Atlantis is lost at sea. The tragedy is that Atlantis still stands in plain sight, sunken windows, buried forts, demolished domes, and we refuse to see it. Why Atlantis endures? Why has the myth of Atlantis captured imaginations for millennia? Because deep down, humanity remembers. We sense we were once greater, once freer, once more unified. Atlantis is not just a story. It is the scar of a real event. And that event has a name: Tartaria, the continuation of suppression. By dismissing Atlantis as myth and Tartaria as cartographic error, the resetters achieved the same goal: keep humanity believing we are fragile, primitive, and lucky to have survived. If we knew the truth, that we once lived in harmony with abundance, energy, and design, we would demand it again. The erasure of Atlantis and Tartaria are not separate stories. They are chapters of the same book, a book of civilization, erased and rewritten, over and over, to keep humanity chained to scarcity. Tartaria wasn't Atlantis' twin. Tartaria was Atlantis, and the fact that we are told both never existed only proves how hard they've worked to bury the truth. They did not simply dig and demolish. They rewrote the sentence that names us. When a civilization must be erased, brute force alone is clumsy. Brute force leaves rubble and witnesses and memory. The true art of erasure is bureaucratic, literary, and institutional. A quiet suffocation of evidence, a steady replacement of story, a slow laundering of the past until the lie becomes fact. If Tartaria was removed from the world, It was by hands that understood how history is taught, recorded, and believed, and how to change every one of those things without ever raising a public blade. Erasure by paper and press. Print is how a people remembers itself. If you control the presses, you can control the memory. After the mud came the pamphlet. Maps redrawn, atlas pages relabeled, footnotes changed. Cartographers who once marked Tartaria found new clients and new commissions. Their plates changed for the purse of those who paid. The name faded from the atlases that educated rulers, lawyers, and school children. The erasure began in ink. Newspapers, then the engines of public opinion, were filled with sensational accounts of progress and rebirth. Headlines celebrated temporary world's fairs, praised industrial triumphs, printed photographs of modern palaces and expositions. Photographs, once literal attestations, were annotated and captioned with seductive lies. Built in months, temporary plaster, a marvel of contemporary industry. The visual proof remained, but the context was stolen. The public, seeing pictures and reading narrative, accepted the new story. Publishing houses, museums, and the nascent university presses were quietly enrolled into the campaign. Histories were commissioned, textbooks rewritten. A generation of teachers, trained under the new narrative, passed it on to their students as fact. By the time any skeptical voice gathered dust in a private study, the textbooks had already cemented the new chronology in classrooms around the world. Libraries burn and archives vanish. It is a trite line to say, the victors write history. The reality is more surgical. Archives are purged. Consider the pattern: mysterious fires, accidental collapses of repositories, libraries closed and sold. Entire municipal records vanish in a single night. Institutions change hands. Catalogues are lost in moves. When institutional memory is fractured, the past becomes guesswork. Beyond the dramatic incidents were quieter thefts. Ledgers stolen, plates removed, blueprints filed away under corporate names. The technical manuals that once described atmospheric energy systems were not destroyed so much as reclassified as private property or trade secrets. Patent repositories were quietly consolidated. When a technology is rebranded as commerce rather than common heritage, access narrows instantly. Think of the mechanics. An inventor arrives at a laboratory with ideas that would untether cities from fuel. A banker offers funds, then quietly withdraws. Manuals are purchased, then embargoed. Laboratories fail for lack of funds. Patents languish under legal depositions. The apparatus of capitalism, contracts, debts, courts, becomes an instrument of censorship. Institutions re-engineered. Erasing a civilization is easier when the institutions that shape belief are co-opted. Schools, universities, scientific academies, these become the guardians of the new sanitized timeline. Tenured scholars write compendia that exclude inconvenient evidence. Grants flow to research that affirms the established story. Independent inquiries are starved of resources. Consider how curricula change. Where once a study of ancient cities would show architectural continuity across continents, now the syllabus fractures knowledge into neat national histories. Comparative technologies vanish from syllabi. When revived, they're framed as precursors rather than proof of a shared global system. The discipline of archaeology is turned into stratified digests of eras, each palatable and politically safe, with anomalies explained away as regional variants or popular myth. Museums, too, are remodeled. Collections that might link distant architectural motifs are catalogued by country, by ruler, or by era, deliberately isolating the patterns that would show a unified global design. Exhibitions that do acknowledge global similarities frame them as influence or coincidence, not connection. The visual evidence is tamed with labels and placards. The public sees objects, but the narrative that ties them together is absent. The legal grip. Control of the law was as important as control of law. Property titles were redrawn. Land registries, once public, were consolidated into centralized bureaucracies. Governments issued decrees under states of emergency following disasters and wars, legal instruments that authorized expropriation, rezoning, and demolition in the name of public safety or progress. With legal cover, demolition became administration. Theft became eminent domain. Legislation also made it difficult to publish dissent. Libel laws, licensing requirements, and publishing taxes hemmed in independent presses. Researchers without institutional backing faced legal exposures that no one could afford. The law, outwardly neutral, became an invisible force field around the new narrative. Financial incentives and the economics of forgetting. Never underestimate incentives. The people who benefited from the reset were not mystical conspirators, but investors, industrialists, and state actors who profited from scarcity. Oil and coal barons, transport magnates, and nascent imperial states had motives that matched opportunity. When an energy grid that delivered free power stood in the way of revenue streams worth fortunes, the calculus was simple. Make the old system disappear. Replace it with one you can tax and sell. Corporate consolidation followed the reset like vultures after a storm. Companies bought materials and sites for redevelopment. Wealth flowed to those who controlled reconstruction contracts. With ownership came power to determine what the public saw and learned. Capitalism did not invent the erase and rebuild strategy, it exploited it. And when profit and power align with censorship, history becomes collateral. The cultural engineering of consent. The erasure succeeded not only because of force, but because people consented, sometimes willingly, often unknowingly. New narratives offered stability in a world traumatized by flood and fire. The promise of work, a vision of progress, a new civic identity, these were powerful salves. If you can give people a future, you can persuade them to let go of the past. Artists and writers were invited into the project. Some complied out of belief, others out of necessity. Grand exhibitions framed the narrative as triumph over disaster, the large-scale modern city replacing the drowning past. Popular culture adopted the image of progress, and with enough repetition, the image hardened into reality. That is how an erased civilization became myth. Not all suppression needed secrecy. Some of it could be sold as salvation. Silent resistance and fragmentary truths. Not everyone accepted the rewrite. Small scattered resistances held fragments of memory, family stories, regional songs, hidden ledgers. In attics and private collections, maps with Tartaria still exist. In the masonry of half-buried buildings, inscriptions contradict municipal records. In the catalogues of obsessive antiquarians, photographs show whole streets submerged to lower levels, evidence that official explanations struggle to absorb. These fragments form the roots of later inquiry. They became the clues that, a century and a half later, would allow people to begin asking different questions. Why are there doors under streets? Why do so many cities show the same ornamental language across continents? Why do world fairs vanish like stage sets? The questions were the first mortar of reconstruction. The final shape of power. By the time the world had been repainted, a new architecture of power had been installed. Industrial capital, nation-states, dependent on fossil wealth, a global pedagogy that taught scarcity as inevitability. Tartaria's technological artifacts were turned into props, or explained away as curiosities. The towers that once transmitted free energy became monuments to style. The domes that once focused resonance became Victorian flourish. The grid that could have liberated humanity was subjectified and hidden. This was not the accidental consequence of time. It was the design of men who saw an older abundance as a threat. Men who preferred an easier world to govern. A world where energy is a commodity, history is curated, and memory is purchasable. The hands that reshaped the world left their fingerprints not in the rubble alone, but in the very lessons children learned at school, in the laws that govern our property, in the ledgers held behind locked doors. Their greatest success was not erasure by rubble, but erasure by narrative. And until those narratives are examined, Tartaria will remain a phantom in our maps, an absence explained away as accident, while the architecture of suppression stands, visible and unchallenged. Step onto the streets of almost any old metropolis, and you will notice something strange if you know where to look. Windows half buried beneath the soil, doors that open directly into dirt, arched entryways sitting below the level of the street, as though the city were slowly sinking into the ground. We are told these are basements, architectural quirks, convenient storage spaces. But across the world, the same pattern repeats. What if they aren't basements at all? What if they are the upper floors of cities that were buried? The depths beneath our feet. Beneath our modern pavements lie layers of forgotten worlds. Dig into the foundations of St. Petersburg, Moscow, Paris, or even San Francisco, and you'll find staircases that descend not into cellars, but into entire streets swallowed whole. In Edinburgh, ancient vaults stretch under the old town, filled with the remains of lives lived before the official timeline of the city. Archaeologists explain these away as accidents of geology, urban renewal, or fire. But the sheer consistency is difficult to dismiss. From Europe to Asia to the Americas, buildings share the same fate. Lower levels entombed, entire neighborhoods swallowed. This was not local chance. It was a global phenomenon. The mud flood reconsidered. The mud flood is not a fringe curiosity. It is the only explanation that unites these anomalies into a single story. A global surge of earth, sudden and devastating, buried Tartarian cities beneath meters of soil. Survivors, left bewildered, simply built on top. But the resetters went further. They rebranded these buried cities as curiosities of design, subfloors, basements, catacombs. What once were bustling streets became forgotten underworlds. Official explanations turned catastrophe into construction. Imagine the scene. Families trapped as mud swallowed their homes, towers buried halfway, temples reduced to hilltops. Then, silence. The survivors returned and found their world unrecognizable. The flood was not just mud, it was memory erased in an instant. Ghosts of the old world. These buried structures still whisper of Tartaria's reach. Windows with ornate stonework now peek out from the dirt. Arches designed for grandeur are reduced to cramped cellar entrances. Vaults, still intact, hide frescoes and carvings that speak of sophistication, not storage. In places like Derinkuyu in Turkey, subterranean cities stretch for miles. Labyrinths that could shelter tens of thousands. Historians claim they were carved by hand for defense, but their ventilation shafts, smooth walls, and intricate planning suggest something far beyond primitive excavation. Were they shelters against disaster, or remnants of Tartaria's lost global infrastructure? A civilization buried alive. Consider what this means. If cities were buried worldwide, then Tartaria's disappearance was not a slow decline, but a sudden entombment. Its people did not fade into obscurity, they were swallowed whole. What we call modern cities may be nothing more than rebuilt shells atop Tartarian ruins. The tragedy is not just loss of life, it is the theft of continuity. Each time a street is buried, the past becomes inaccessible. Each time a lower level is dismissed as a basement, the truth is sealed behind plaster and neglect. And in the silence, the resetter's version of history grows stronger. hidden in plain sight. Walk through your own city with new eyes. Look at the foundations, the half-buried windows, the bricked-up arches. These are not accidents of architecture. They are the remains of a world beneath ours, a Tartarian world deliberately forgotten. The buried cities are proof that the reset was not metaphorical. It was physical. It reshaped the very ground beneath our feet. And though officials still dismiss the evidence as quirks of design, the truth is clear. The old world lies just beneath us, waiting to be uncovered. The greatest crime of the reset was not just the burial of buildings, but the burial of knowledge. Tartaria's cities were not simply beautiful, they were functional, engineered with principles we barely grasp today. The remnants of their technology lie scattered across the globe, misunderstood, mislabeled, or destroyed. What humanity was told were decorations and ornaments may have been the core of an entirely different technological paradigm, one that offered free energy, resonance-based communication, and a harmonious relationship with the earth itself. Architecture as technology. Take the domes, spires, and towers that define the old world style of architecture. We are taught they were built for aesthetics, religious symbolism, or acoustic resonance in cathedrals. Yet their uniformity across continents suggests a deeper purpose. Domes act as capacitors, storing and redistributing energy. Spires are conductors, channeling currents between the atmosphere and the earth. Star forts, with their geometric precision, appear less like defensive structures and more like resonant circuits, giant machines hidden in plain sight. The buildings were not merely shelters, they were devices. The city itself was a machine, the mystery of free energy. Nikola Tesla, centuries later, pursued the dream of wireless, limitless energy drawn from the ether. But was he rediscovering something far older? The patterns of Tartarian architecture suggest he was. Every cathedral with its rose windows, every ornate tower capped with a metallic finial, echoes the principles Tesla tried to apply at Wardenclyffe, harnessing atmospheric electricity, resonating with the natural frequency of the earth, distributing power wirelessly across vast distances. If Tartaria mastered this system, it would explain their abundance. Energy was not scarce. It was everywhere, flowing through structures designed to capture and share it. The reset did not simply erase buildings, it dismantled an energy grid, the water systems. Even the aqueducts and canals of Tartaria may have been more than utilities. Water, when moved through specific channels and chambers, creates resonance. Flowing water becomes a conductor, a medium for transmitting energy. Evidence suggests Tartarian cities integrated water systems directly into their architecture, not merely for drinking and cleaning, but to power the resonant networks that connected their towers and domes. Imagine fountains not as decoration, but as vital nodes in a living power grid. Sound and frequency. Accounts of ancient buildings show acoustics so perfect they defy modern replication. Whispering galleries, resonant chambers, vaulted ceilings, where sound travels for impossible distances. Were these accidental, or deliberate uses of frequency to heal, to communicate, to align human consciousness with energy fields? If Tartaria understood frequency, then their world was one where sound was medicine, where resonance was technology, and where harmony was literal. Such mastery would not only provide power, but shape society itself, removing scarcity, disease, and conflict born of competition for resources. Machines we cannot name, hidden in old photographs and archives, are machines we cannot explain. Ornate antique streetlights with no visible power source, monorail-like transport in an age supposedly without advanced engines. Entire expositions filled with colossal machines, displayed once and then dismantled, their existence brushed aside as temporary. The pattern repeats: build, display, erase. Technologies were paraded before the public under the guise of novelty, then destroyed or locked away. They were never meant to survive the reset. Why erase technology? The answer is simple: control. A world with free energy cannot be monopolized. A society where architecture powers itself has no need for oil barons, electric companies, or endless wars for resources. The elites who inherited the post-Tartarian world could not rule a humanity living in abundance, so they buried Tartaria's technologies under mud, rubble, and propaganda. They rebuilt the world around scarcity, and they sold back to us, at great cost, fragments of what we once had for free, clues that remain. Look carefully at the ornamental features of the old world: metallic crowns on rooftops, grid-like windows of precise geometry, symmetrical star forts aligned perfectly with magnetic north. These are not accidents of style. They are the fingerprints of a technological system hidden in plain sight. Tartaria's legacy is not gone. It is dormant, waiting to be recognized. And once recognized, it can be reborn. The resetters knew this. That is why they fought not just to bury buildings, but to bury memory. Because if humanity ever remembered the truth of Tartaria's technology, the entire foundation of modern power would crumble overnight. If Tartaria's technology and infrastructure survived long enough to be photographed, catalogued, or even admired in plain sight, then why is so little of it acknowledged today? Because the evidence wasn't just ignored, it was systematically dismantled, hidden, and rebranded. Suppression wasn't an accident, it was the strategy. Demolition by design. Cities across Europe, Asia, and the Americas underwent urban renewal in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Grand Tartarian structures, massive stone complexes with impossible craftsmanship, were either torn down completely or reduced to ruins under the guise of modernization. Think of it. Whole neighborhoods demolished to make way for progress. Railway expansions, government offices, or simply unsafe buildings condemned and razed. The narrative of progress justified the erasure of architecture too advanced to fit the official story. The elites didn't just want the old world buried, they wanted it obliterated, so the next generations would never even ask questions. The world's fairs and expositions. Nowhere is suppression more obvious than in the great expositions of the late 1800s and early 1900s. Cities like Chicago, Paris, St. Louis, and San Francisco suddenly displayed colossal, temporary palaces and entire cityscapes of monumental architecture. The story goes that they were built in months, plaster over wood, meant to dazzle, then vanish. But examine the photographs closely. Stone columns, intricate domes, steel frameworks, far too advanced for the supposed timeline. These weren't plaster fakes. They were Tartarian inheritances, displayed one last time before demolition. The fairs were not celebrations of progress. They were cover stories for disposal. A global exhibition of a civilization about to be erased from memory. Fires, floods, and convenient disasters. Over and over, Tartarian landmarks were lost in sudden catastrophes. The great fires of Chicago, Boston, San Francisco, library burnings that destroyed entire archives, floods that washed away records, just when scrutiny might have revealed too much. Coincidence, or convenient tools of erasure? The pattern is too exact to dismiss. Every time the old world resurfaced, it was met with disaster. Every time curiosity sparked, fire or flood conveniently intervened. Nature became the scapegoat, while deliberate hands ensured the destruction was complete. Institutional amnesia. The suppression didn't stop with demolition. It was institutionalized. Universities rewrote history. Museums recatalogued artifacts. Architecture was relabeled Victorian, Gothic Revival, or Neoclassical, as if grand designs had spontaneously appeared in the 19th century without precedent. Engineers were told not to question how massive granite blocks were cut, transported, and placed with precision. Even our machines struggle to match. Historians who strayed from the script found their careers ended, their work dismissed as fringe. Whole departments were founded not to discover truth, but to protect the narrative. The rebranding of Tartarian tech. Street lamps that once glowed without visible power sources were repurposed as gas lamps. Towers that functioned as resonant energy devices became bell towers. Intricate fountains, designed as hydraulic nodes, were recast as mere decoration. Every Tartarian device that couldn't be destroyed was rebranded. The evidence wasn't just hidden, it was disguised, its purpose rewritten until it became invisible to us. We walk through cities full of Tartarian relics and see only ornamentation, because that's what we've been told to see. The silence of power. Governments, corporations, and religious institutions all shared an interest in suppression. Acknowledging Tartaria would mean acknowledging abundance, free energy, free communication, free healing. But scarcity is profitable. Scarcity makes nations dependent. Scarcity justifies war. And so the silence held. From kings and priests to oil barons and bankers, the story was consistent. Tartaria never existed. The mud flood is a myth. The architecture is style, not science. Believe the story, not your eyes. Buried, but not gone. Despite centuries of suppression, Tartaria's ghost lingers. Photographs, maps, artifacts, and ruins still exist. The truth was never fully erased. It was fragmented, scattered, rebranded. And now, piece by piece, it is being reassembled. The suppression succeeded for a time, but like mud covering a city, it only concealed, it did not destroy. And when the mud is cleared away, what remains is undeniable. Tartaria was real. Its evidence surrounds us. Its erasure was deliberate. The question now is not whether Tartaria existed, but why those in power worked so hard to ensure we never knew. The erasure of Tartaria did not end in the 19th century. It continues now, in the 21st. The methods have evolved, less fire and demolition, more distraction and control, but the goal remains the same. Keep Tartaria locked away as myth, never fact. Academia as gatekeeper. Universities present themselves as engines of discovery, but when it comes to Tartaria, they act as gatekeepers. Professors dismiss the very mention of it as pseudoscience. Research proposals that challenge the mainstream timeline are quietly denied funding. Graduate students who question anomalies risk careers before they begin. It's not about debate, it's about containment. By branding Tartaria as fringe, academia ensures the subject never enters serious discourse. Those who control what is respectable control what is believed. The role of media. Modern media is complicit. Documentaries on history repeat the same narratives, recycled endlessly. Rome, Greece, Egypt, the Industrial Revolution. When anomalies are acknowledged at all, they are framed as curiosities, mysteries with no real consequence. Mainstream outlets ridicule anyone who dares suggest Tartaria's existence, lumping it in with flat Earth theories or UFO hoaxes. This ridicule is strategic. By associating truth with absurdity, the gatekeepers ensure most people will never even consider the evidence. The Internet's double edge. For the first time in centuries, individuals can share and compare evidence on a global scale. Photographs of buried windows, maps with Tartaria still marked, images of the world fairs, all circulate online, building a body of proof that cannot be contained. But the resetters adapt. Search algorithms bury content. Fact-checkers dismiss Tartarian evidence without investigation. Platforms throttle visibility under the guise of misinformation. The very tools that could free memory are also used to silence it. The academic firewall. Notice how official institutions react. Wikipedia, the first stop for millions, has no serious entry for Tartaria. The subject is framed as a conspiracy theory, never as a historical inquiry. Museums decline to answer questions about architectural anomalies. When pressed, experts recycle rehearsed lines. Basements, revival styles, natural disasters. This isn't ignorance, it's strategy. By controlling the first impression, they control curiosity. Most people, faced with ridicule or official dismissal, stop asking questions. And that is the point. Governments and classified archives. Governments hold vast archives that remain sealed. Military cartographers of the 18th and 19th centuries mapped the world in exquisite detail. Why are so many of these maps classified, inaccessible to the public? Why do so many national archives burn, flood, or accidentally misplace their catalogues? The pattern suggests a continuity of suppression, states guarding not just borders, but memory itself. If Tartaria's truth were acknowledged, the legitimacy of modern nation-states would crumble, their histories revealed as manufactured. Corporate custodians. Corporations, too, play their part. Energy monopolies profit from scarcity. Pharmaceutical giants thrive on treatments, not cures. If Tartaria's resonance technologies, healing frequencies, free energy, atmospheric power were rediscovered, entire industries would collapse. Thus, suppression is not merely academic, it is economic. Corporations fund the very universities, media outlets, and think tanks that keep the lid on Tartaria. It is a cycle of control. Money feeds silence, and silence ensures money. The strategy of distraction. When erasure fails, distraction succeeds. Fill the public mind with endless noise, wars, scandals, pop culture, digital addiction, and they won't look down at the buried windows beneath their feet. Inundate people with breaking news, and history vanishes behind the curtain of the present. This is why Tartaria remains unknown, not because the evidence is absent, but because attention is diverted. The persistence of truth. Despite these efforts, Tartaria refuses to die. The more people look, the more evidence they find. Photographs surface, archives leak, independent researchers stitch together patterns, and every anomaly ignored by the mainstream becomes a spark of curiosity for those willing to question. The cover-up is powerful, but not absolute. Suppression works only as long as people refuse to see, and more people are seeing every day. Why the cover-up continues, why centuries after the reset does the suppression remain so aggressive? Because Tartaria represents more than history. It represents possibility. If we once lived in abundance, in unity, with free access to power and knowledge, then scarcity, war, and oppression are not natural. They are engineered. Acknowledging Tartaria would expose not just a lost past, but the fraud of the present. The cover-up is not about yesterday, it is about tomorrow. If the truth of Tartaria spreads, the system built on its erasure collapses, and those who profit from that system will do everything they can to keep the past buried. Suppression can only last so long. Mud can bury walls, ink can rewrite maps, institutions can lock archives, but truth has a way of seeping back through the cracks. Tartaria is not gone, it is waiting, and if humanity dares to look honestly, the revelation could reset the reset, fragments that refuse to die. The first cracks in the cover-up come from the smallest details. A child notices that a basement window looks like a full-sized door. A traveler wonders why cathedrals in Mexico look identical to those in Moscow. A researcher opens an atlas from the 1600s and sees Tartaria clearly marked. One fragment on its own proves nothing. But collect enough fragments, and the mosaic begins to appear. Each piece is a shard of a greater whole, a civilization that refuses to remain erased. The reawakening of curiosity. Curiosity is more dangerous to the resetters than rebellion. A rebellion can be crushed. Curiosity spreads like fire. Once a person begins to question official narratives, they question everything. History, power, scarcity itself. The reawakening has already begun. Online communities, independent researchers, rogue historians, all weaving together a tapestry of Tartaria's truth. Though scattered, their collective work is powerful. The gatekeepers can scoff, but the questions multiply, and questions cannot be unasked. What the revelation means. If Tartaria is acknowledged, even partially, the implications are staggering. History must be rewritten. Every timeline, every textbook, every official origin story collapses. Humanity will realize we have been lied to on a scale unprecedented. Technology must be reevaluated. Free energy, resonant architecture, sound healing, all of it becomes possibility again. Scarcity will be revealed as engineered. Power must be challenged. Governments, corporations, and institutions lose their legitimacy once their complicity in suppression is exposed. A new era of accountability begins. The revelation of Tartaria is not just about the past. It is about the present and the future. Resetting the reset. What happens when humanity realizes the reset happened? We reset it again, this time not to erase but to remember. To rebuild not in ignorance, but in awareness. Imagine cities where architecture once again channels natural energy. Imagine medicine rooted in harmony with frequency and resonance. Imagine a global culture not divided by national myths, but unified by a shared acknowledgement of what was lost. The old world was buried, but the next world can be built upon it. The fear of power. Those in power fear this outcome above all. Their wealth, control, and dominance depend on the illusion of scarcity. They need us to believe progress is fragile, that abundance is impossible, that history began with them. Tartaria exposes these as lies. The revelation is not just historical, it is existential for the systems that govern us now. That is why suppression continues. That is why ridicule persists. That is why archives remain sealed. The choice before us. Tartaria is more than an empire lost. It is a mirror held up to humanity. It asks, do we accept the story we've been given, or do we dare to see the evidence with our own eyes? Do we remain in scarcity, or reclaim the abundance once freely ours? The choice is not in the hands of the resetters anymore. It is in ours. The return of memory. Perhaps the greatest revenge against erasure is remembrance. Each photograph rediscovered, each building reconsidered, each story retold, brings Tartaria back from silence. The past cannot be unburied once it is spoken aloud, and so the revelation is not a single event. It is a process, one mind at a time, one truth at a time, until the weight of evidence and awareness tips the balance. The mud will wash away, and beneath it, the outlines of a forgotten world will emerge, undeniable. Toward a new dawn, Tartaria is no longer just a name on a map. It is a spark in the collective mind of humanity, a reminder that our history is deeper, richer, and stranger than we are told, a promise that abundance is possible, a warning that erasure can happen again. But most of all, it is an invitation to remember, to rebuild, and to reclaim what was stolen. When the revelation comes, it will not be gentle. It will shake history, fracture power, and open futures we cannot yet imagine. And it will begin, as it always does, with one undeniable truth. Tartaria was real. The story of Tartaria is not just about one empire. It is about a pattern, an ancient cycle of rise, abundance, destruction, and erasure that has played out across the world more than once. Atlantis, Lemuria, Tartaria. The names differ, but the arc is the same, and if we look closely, we see that this cycle is not natural disaster alone. It is engineered, curated, enforced. It begins with abundance. A civilization learns how to harness natural forces, to live in harmony with energy that flows freely through earth, water, air, and resonance. Scarcity vanishes, conflict wanes, populations grow, cities rise, and culture flourishes. Humanity becomes harder to control, and then the cycle turns. Catastrophe arrives. Sometimes it is flood, sometimes fire. Sometimes the earth itself heaves up in revolt. Survivors are scattered, buildings are buried, entire systems vanish. And into that silence come the resetters, the ones who erase, rewrite, and replace the past. But what if this is not random? What if the cycle itself is imposed? Part 1. Recognizing the pattern. Across the globe, myths repeat the same story. Golden ages followed by sudden destruction. Atlantis swallowed by water. The Mayas' great cities abandoned. Ancient India's tales of Vimanas and cosmic wars. Always, the arc is the same. Flourishing, catastrophe, reset. Historians dismiss these as archetypes, human imagination repeating itself. But what if imagination is memory? What if these myths are fragments of real events, different names for the same reset, experienced by different cultures? The parallels are too precise to ignore. Atlantis and Tartaria share the same fate, advanced civilizations erased, their technologies buried, their people scattered. What differs is only the disaster that delivers the burial. Part 2. Catastrophe as cover. The mud flood was not simply a natural event. It was the perfect cover. Imagine the advantage it offers those who would control the narrative. An entire civilization swallowed, its lower levels entombed, its infrastructure drowned in silt. When survivors crawl back to the surface, disoriented and grieving, they do not have the strength to question. They will accept whatever story is handed to them. This is the first stage of the reset, catastrophe to break the continuity of memory. The second stage is narrative. Institutions arrive, religious, governmental, academic, bearing truths about the disaster. They tell survivors, this was God's punishment, or a freak of nature, or simply the way of the world. With authority established, the rewriting begins. The third stage is reconstruction. Cities are rebuilt on top of ruins, but in forms that suit the new order. The old technologies are stripped, the new systems installed. Energy grids of resonance and free flow are replaced with grids of scarcity, coal, oil, and later electricity, all dependent on central control. The cycle is complete. Abundance becomes scarcity, unity becomes division, memory becomes myth. Part 3. The role of the elites. The elites are not passive observers of the reset. They are its architects. The same families who profited from the Industrial Revolution, the same dynasties who controlled colonial expansion, were the beneficiaries of Tartaria's erasure. They understood that whoever controls the past controls the future. By erasing Tartaria, they inherited not just land and resources, but legitimacy. They became the founders of modern civilization, rewriting history to make themselves the beginning of progress. Wars, fires, revolutions, these are not merely political struggles. They are tools of reset. Each great fire that destroyed Tartarian architecture, each war that redrew borders, each revolution that dismantled institutions, these were deliberate stages in the erasure. The elites did not invent the cycle, they learned how to wield it. Part 4. Breaking the illusion of progress. We are told history is linear, that humanity crawled from caves to huts, from huts to villages, from villages to cities, step by step, invention by invention. The reset makes this illusion possible. By erasing the peaks of history, the valley looks like a mountain. Tartaria proves this wrong. The scale of its architecture, the resonance of its designs, the precision of its technologies, none of this fits the linear model. Our ancestors were not primitive. They were advanced, perhaps more advanced than we are now. The cycle works only if we believe the illusion of progress. That is why every trace of Tartaria had to be destroyed, rebranded, or buried. If humanity knew we had already mastered free energy, harmony, and abundance, we would refuse the scarcity sold to us today. Part 5. The cycle repeats. This is not the first reset, nor will it be the last, unless we break it. Atlantis fell to water, Tartaria to mud. What will the next reset be? Fire? Ice? Digital collapse? Already the signs are visible. Data is the new architecture, and just as Tartarian buildings were demolished, so too can digital archives vanish with a keystroke. Memory is now cloud-based, controlled by corporations, vulnerable to erasure. The cycle has adapted, but so too has resistance. Unlike Tartaria's survivors, we are not scattered, we are connected. The internet, flawed though it is, allows fragments to align. Researchers in different continents can compare anomalies, share maps, uncover buried truths. The resetters are powerful, but the cycle is cracking. Part 6. The choice ahead. Here lies the truth. The cycle is not inevitable. It can be broken, but only if humanity chooses awareness over ignorance, memory over myth, abundance over scarcity. If Tartaria's lesson is forgotten, the resetters will succeed again. If it is remembered, the cycle ends. The golden age returns, not as a myth, but as a future. Tartaria's destruction was tragic, but its rediscovery could be liberating. The deeper you dig into the reset, the clearer it becomes that this wasn't just a single event. It was a strategy applied on a global scale. And that strategy was precise, methodical, and devastatingly effective. The vanishing of infrastructure. Look closely at photographs from the late 1800s. Streets lined with street lamps of cast iron, tall and ornate, with no visible wires or fuel lines. Monuments with metallic spires that gleam in the sun, capped with orbs or finials. Water towers shaped like resonant domes rather than crude containers. We are told these were decorative, but anyone with an eye for engineering can see they were part of a system, an interconnected grid designed not only to beautify, but to function. The grid of Tartaria. Where is that grid now? Where are those devices, those towers, those fountains? Dismantled, replaced. Quietly, piece by piece, the infrastructure of free energy was ripped out and substituted with the infrastructure of dependence. Coal plants, gas lines, electrical grids that charge by the meter. It was not simply about burying buildings. It was about burying the very skeleton of abundance and replacing it with one of scarcity. How populations were reset. The reset was not only architectural, it was demographic. Survivors of the mud flood, scattered and dazed, were joined by mass waves of immigrants to fill the cities. Orphan trains moved children across continents. Whole populations were resettled, given new names, new stories, new histories. By erasing continuity of population, the elites erased continuity of memory. A city without its elders cannot tell its past. A street without generational roots accepts whatever narrative it is fed. This was the human side of the reset, reshaping demographics so the story of Tartaria could never be passed down intact. The role of language. Language is memory. When you erase words, you erase worlds. The reset was accompanied by linguistic reformation. Languages standardized, alphabets restructured, dialects erased. Old Tartarian scripts vanish from archives, replaced with neat national tongues. Maps that once bore the name Tartaria are redrawn with new labels: Russia, Mongolia, Siberia. The land is the same, but the name is erased. And once the name is gone, the memory fades. This is why the elites focused not only on demolition, but on dictionaries, grammars, and encyclopedias. Control the words, and you control the world. Fires as a reset tool. The pattern of fires is unmistakable. Chicago, Boston, San Francisco, all consumed in flames in the 19th century. The official narratives are chaotic: lanterns kicked over, earthquakes sparking infernos, wooden cities too dense to save. But why do these fires target exactly the same kinds of buildings? Massive stone structures, ornate civic centers, intricate cathedrals. Why do the fires consume records, archives, blueprints, but leave behind the stories that suit the new narrative? Fire is a scalpel. It clears the slate while maintaining plausible deniability. It is disaster framed as accident, catastrophe framed as chance. But beneath the smoke, the pattern is too precise. Fires were the tools of the resetters, surgical strikes against Tartarian memory. The reset as rebranding. Imagine you inherit a city full of Tartarian marvels: grand domes, free energy spires, symmetrical star forts. You cannot explain them. You cannot allow the people to know what they were. So you rebrand them. A dome becomes a church, a spire becomes a bell tower, a star fort becomes a military outpost. The public accepts these labels, and the truth disappears behind a curtain of misdirection. This is how Tartaria survived in plain sight. The architecture was not demolished everywhere. Some of it still stands. But it was renamed, stripped of function, and reduced to ornament. People look at it every day, never realizing they are walking inside machines designed for a world of abundance. Psychological warfare. The reset was not just physical, it was psychological. Survivors were told that what they remembered was wrong, that their ruins were new, that their losses were natural. Generations were raised on rewritten textbooks. To question was to be mocked. Psychological warfare is more powerful than demolition. When you convince a population that its memory is false, you don't need to burn every building. You only need to plant doubt. The survivors of Tartaria were gaslit into silence. Their descendants grew up believing the lie was truth. And we, centuries later, inherit that amnesia. Cycles of suppression. The reset of Tartaria is only one chapter. The same strategy appears again and again in human history. Golden ages erased, survivors scattered, myths replacing memory. Atlantis, advanced, global, erased by flood. Tartaria, advanced, global, erased by mud. The present, advanced, digital, at risk of reset by data collapse. The cycle is not just historical, it is ongoing. We are living in the middle of the next reset. Archives are digital, memory is fragile, power is centralized, and just as before, catastrophe, engineered or natural, can wipe the slate clean. The fragility of memory. Consider how fragile our memory has become. Entire histories are now locked inside servers owned by corporations. What happens if those servers fail? What happens if access is restricted, censored, deleted? It has already begun. Books vanish from libraries, digital platforms throttle visibility, search results are curated. The same playbook that buried Tartaria is being deployed again, this time not with mud or fire, but with algorithms and access. The cycle adapts, but once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Breaking the cycle. The only way to end the cycle is awareness. Tartaria is not just history, it is warning. If we forget again, if we accept the lies again, the resetters will win again. But if we remember, if we see the buried windows, the mislabeled architecture, the suppressed technologies, then we begin to break the spell. The cycle ends, not with rebellion, but with remembrance. Awareness is the antidote to erasure. Toward the next dawn, Tartaria fell, Atlantis fell, countless civilizations fell, but each time, fragments survived. And those fragments reach us now, whispering across centuries, urging us to remember. The cycle is not inevitable. It is a trap that can be broken, and once it is broken, humanity will no longer live in scarcity, in lies, in erasures. We will step back into the abundance once freely ours. The cycle of erasure and rebirth is not confined to myth. It is not confined to dusty maps or silent ruins. It is visible now in the very structure of our world. And if we are brave enough to look directly at it, the cycle begins to unravel, the illusion of origin. The reset depends on convincing us that our story began recently, that modern history is only a few centuries old, and that everything before it was fragmented, primitive, chaotic. But the evidence tells another story. Humanity has reached heights before, has built global systems before, has lived in harmony with abundance before. Why then does every official narrative insist on portraying the past as primitive? Because if the past was primitive, then the present looks miraculous. If the past was advanced, then the present looks like theft. The illusion of origin is not just about history, it is about legitimacy. The Great Industrial Masquerade. The Industrial Revolution is held up as the triumph of human ingenuity. Factories, railways, electric grids, proof that humanity had finally mastered science. But what if much of this progress was not invention at all, but repurposing? Railway lines appear on maps before the industries that supposedly built them. Electric trams ran in cities before electricity was allegedly widespread. Gigantic civic buildings, capable of housing thousands, existed long before the populations to justify them. The so-called revolution may have been nothing more than a cover story for the redistribution of Tartarian infrastructure. Imagine inheriting a city fully built, fully functional, and then writing yourself into the story as its creator. That is what the elites did. The Industrial Revolution may have been less about progress and more about possession. Rebuilding in the image of control. When Tartarian systems were dismantled, they were replaced with infrastructures designed not for abundance, but for control. Energy became scarce, parceled out through fossil fuels and taxed grids. Food shifted from local abundance to centralized production and dependency. Education narrowed, focused on obedience and repetition rather than curiosity and memory. Religion reframed abundance as sin and scarcity as virtue. The world was not rebuilt to mirror Tartaria's abundance. It was rebuilt to enforce dependence. Every pipe, every wire, every law was laid with one goal: to ensure humanity would never remember the taste of freedom, the psychological anchors. The resetters understood that physical erasure alone was not enough. They needed psychological anchors to keep humanity trapped. Fear of loss. Tell people that progress is fragile, that we nearly lost civilization once, and they will cling to the new order out of gratitude. Worship of authority. Replace curiosity with deference. Teach that truth comes from textbooks, experts, institutions, not from evidence in plain sight. Shame of doubt. Mock anyone who questions. Make skepticism a joke. Ensure that ridicule replaces inquiry. These anchors are still in place. That is why most people, confronted with evidence of Tartaria, laugh or look away. It is not stupidity, it is conditioning, the cycle and the present. We stand now at the edge of another potential reset. The patterns are repeating. Digital dependency. Just as Tartaria's architecture once held memory, our servers hold it now. Centralized, fragile, controlled. Disasters, fires, floods, earthquakes, still convenient tools, still erasing records and archives when they threaten to reveal too much. Narratives, wars and revolutions still offered as explanations, still masking deeper patterns of control. The difference is that today, fragments spread faster. One buried window, photographed and shared online, can spark thousands of questions. One rediscovered map can reach millions. For the first time, humanity has the tools to break the cycle in real time. What breaking the cycle means. To break the cycle is not only to remember Tartaria, it is to reject scarcity itself. It is to demand technologies that serve abundance, not profit. It is to build societies that unify rather than divide. The resetters thrive on forgetfulness. Their power dissolves in the light of memory. If Tartaria teaches anything, it is this. The greatest weapon of the oppressed is remembrance, toward continuity. Civilizations rise and fall, but continuity, memory passed forward, can prevent erasure. If humanity holds on to Tartaria's fragments, if we teach the truth to our children, then the resetters cannot complete their work. The cycle ends not with revolution, but with continuity restored. For the first time, we stand at the threshold. Will we forget again, or will we remember? Will we accept the story, or will we reclaim the one buried beneath it? Closing of Act 14. The global reset cycle is not myth, it is the hidden architecture of history. Atlantis, Tartaria, the present day, each linked, each echoing the same script, but the script can be rewritten, the cycle can be broken. Tartaria was erased once. The question is whether we allow it to be erased again. When you look out at the world tonight, the cities glowing, the towers rising, the hum of machines surrounding you, it's easy to believe this is the pinnacle of human civilization. That history has been one steady march from darkness to light. That progress is fragile, hard-earned and entirely ours. But beneath our feet, the old world whispers. Windows buried under soil. Maps marked with forgotten names. Stories of floods, resets, and cities that once glowed with their own power. Tartaria has not vanished. It is folded into the layers of the earth, the margins of our books, the architecture we pass every day without seeing. The persistence of memory. You cannot bury memory forever. You can drown it in mud, burn it in libraries, mock it in classrooms, but the fragments always survive, and fragments are enough. Enough to rebuild a vision of what once was. Enough to ignite the curiosity that will not be silenced. Tartaria persists not in official records, but in echoes, in anomalies, in architecture, in the restless feeling that something about our history does not add up. That feeling is not delusion. It is memory returning. The power of revelation. If Tartaria was real, and the evidence suggests it was, then we are not standing at the height of civilization, but in the shadow of one greater. And that realization changes everything. It proves that abundance is not a dream. That free energy, unified design, and global harmony were once realities. That scarcity, division, and control are not natural. They are engineered. And once humanity accepts that, the chains of the reset begin to break. What comes next? The revelation of Tartaria is not just about rewriting textbooks. It is about rewriting the future. Once we admit that a world of abundance was possible and real, then we can demand it again. Not from governments, not from corporations, but from ourselves. The towers and domes of Tartaria still stand in fragments, reminders of what humanity can build when it works with nature rather than against it. The mud may have buried them, but the design remains, waiting to be reborn. The echo that calls us. Listen closely, and you will hear it. The hum of resonance in old cathedrals, the geometry hidden in star forts, the quiet insistence of forgotten maps. Tartaria calls not from the past, but from the future, a reminder that we are capable of more than we are told. that history is deeper than the story in our books, and that memory, once awakened, can never be erased again. The reset was meant to silence Tartaria forever. Instead, it left behind an echo, a signal that grows louder with every curious mind, every uncovered fragment, every refusal to accept the official script. The echo is here. It is in you. It is in all of us. And so, as we close this journey, remember, Tartaria was not just an empire. It was a possibility, and possibilities, once imagined, never truly die. The mud can cover stone, the elites can cover truth, but no one can cover the human spirit's hunger to know. Tartaria remains, not in maps, not in books, but in the questions that will not stop, the anomalies that will not fade, and the memories that refuse to die. That is its legacy. That is its power. That is its echo.